Hello, and welcome to In the Frame, Exploring the DIA. I'm Graham Beal, your guide to the Detroit Institute of Arts. I'm often asked to play favorites. What's my favorite work of art? Who is my favorite artist? What's my favorite work of art in the DIA? Well, even that last question is difficult to answer. In fact, putting together a book of 400 works of art for treasures of the DIA, I found even that difficult. I'm standing in a favorite work of art. It was a favorite of Diego Rivera himself. He regarded it as his finest mural. But today, we're going to look around at some European works of art, some paintings and some sculpture that I find myself particularly drawn to. This is a very special painting, and part of its special nature comes from the fact that it's rare in the US. There are only two major works of art painted by Peter Bruegel, or we refer to sometimes as Peter Bruegel the Elder, in the US, and the other one is in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. So if you want to see a great Bruegel in this country, you either come to the DIA or you go to the Met. Looking around museums, though, if you look carefully, you might come to the conclusion that it's not so rare, because there are copies of this painting. You can see a copy of this painting in a museum on the West Coast, for example. Copies of this painting, copies of other work by Peter Bruegel, also done by an artist called Peter Bruegel. That was his son, Peter Bruegel the Younger, or Peter Bruegel the Second. And Peter Bruegel the Second also had a son who went by the name of Peter Bruegel, so there's Peter Bruegel the Third. And those are the kinds of works of art that you see circulating around. They're not nearly as good as what the father/grandfather did, but they are extremely fine paintings. Peter Bruegel had another son called Jan Bruegel, and Jan Bruegel worked with Rubens on many paintings, but he also had a son who he called Jan Bruegel II, so that's the second grandson of this Peter Bruegel, who was working as a painter. All in all, they made terrific contribution. This painting was acquired by the museum in 1930, when the great director, William Valentin, a director here from the 20s through to the 40s, was traveling in Europe, in England, on that particular occasion. He traveled in Europe every year with museum patrons. And in the back hallway of an English stately home, he came across a painting that he recognized immediately through its dirt and varnish as the original painting of the wedding dance, for which there were so many different kinds of copies in this country and around the world. He did something unusual. He was so convinced and so excited that he called back to the Arts Commission here in Detroit and requested permission to buy the work right there and then on the spot. And normally when a director wants to buy a work of art, you have to go through a long process. The work of art has to be looked at, it has to be brought into town, it has to be analyzed, has to go in front of a committee with a long explanation about why the museum wants it. But Valentina was so convinced, and the committee had such confidence in Valentina's judgment, that they wired the money to him immediately, and he was able to acquire for a really paltry price as a copy what, when it came here and was cleaned, turned out indeed to be the original. This painting of the wedding dance is one of a series. In fact, there's a painting in Vienna that shows the moments right before this particular scene. It shows actually the wedding banquet, and the young woman in green with her hair flowing in this painting can be identified as sitting at the table with the banquet that preceded this. But now people are out in the open and they're dancing. And to show this sort of mass of wonderful humanity, Bruegel sort of steps up a little bit. He takes a bird's eye view so that he can get as many people in rather than standing at ground level. So you see all these individuals in the foreground here, then going back and back and back until you can see people wandering away, and you can see the bride's mother and the groom's mother sitting in the back where the bride is no longer staying. She, in fact, is right there. As I said, with the hair flowing loose. And around her you can see all of these people dancing in different kinds of excitement, shall we say. People kissing, someone obviously getting well into the state of inebriation, except one individual right there looking down with a very slight smile on his face is a lone man. Because of that, some scholars have suggested that this in fact is Bruegel himself, looking at the world with a sort of a wry attitude. And I certainly favor that interpretation. It's difficult to think of any kind of theme that comes through the history of art where that figure would fit into. On the other hand, there is, leaning against a tree on the other side, also out of it, somewhat out of it, a man in a red hat, and no one's identified who he might be. This painting intrigues me because of the spatial complexity, because of the way that Bruegel has seized on these ordinary scenes, as I say, that would not have been painted before, but also because of the way that he paints them. If you come close to this painting and look very closely, but not so closely that the guards will tell you to step away, you can make out the fact, you can see the drawing underneath. You can see the creases and the folds on these sleeves here. You can see the charcoal or the lead underneath that he's used to draw them. And Bruegel has applied paint so thinly to this that you can still see through to the original drawing, which is wonderful to see the very quick, sure hand, just like Rembrandt 100 years later, working in this way. Because of that, because of this surface, we try never to move this painting. We certainly don't lend it. It's known, the state of Bruegel's are known to be so delicate that this is a work of art that in the 10 years that I've been here, even though it's incredibly important, I've only had one loan request for it that we turned down. So come down to the DIA, and unless something truly extraordinary has happened, you can count on seeing Rivera's murals. You can also count on seeing Bruegel's wedding.